We have a variety of NHL news and rumors to talk about here today. We're talking about some teams like the Penguins, the Coyotes, the Oilers. We have a Mike Hoffman update and several other updates, including some NHL league business. We'll discuss all the latest coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we actually have a lot to cover today. A lot of this is really a variety of news and rumors. A lot of it's league related, some team related. So it's definitely a video you're going to want to watch all the way through because I do have a lot of key information here to talk about today. Let's first start up with a little bit of league business, a lot of which came from the NHL general manager meetings. There is some talk of some teams, especially like the Detroit Red Wings, are pushing for changes to be made with the NHL Draft Lottery system. Obviously, there is reports that Yzerman and the Wings were not overly pleased with how the draft lottery went. Obviously, you know, that's the way it's designed is to prevent teams from kind of intentionally tanking, which is good. I don't want to see tanking in the NHL either. But when you're the worst team in the NHL, if you're looking at, you know, how things were going into this draft lottery, like, the odds of not winning are better than winning. And it's just, the teams at the bottom really should have better odds is kind of what they're going for here. The way that it currently works probably won't be changing in its entirety. I think the main thing that they're looking at, which Detroit's pushing for at least, is just the odds and the weighting that each team gets with their draft lottery balls in the little ping pong machine. So clearly, they want to see a scenario where the worst team does have better chance of picking first than they do, dropping all the way down to fourth. But it seems to be, a regular occurrence of teams dropping to third or fourth or whatever. And the Red Wings are a team who likely aren't going to be overly good for a few years, so not surprised they would bring this up. Clearly, I can understand they're frustrated with not winning this year, and they're probably going to be a team who's involved with the lottery for at least a few more years before they really, gain enough prospects to really work their way out of this. So, understandably so, and we'll see if anything comes from that. Not really sure what the appetite is for the league to consider making changes. Now, there's also talk as well that they may consider bringing back the NHL interview period for free agency, where teams and players were allowed to talk anywhere from 48 to 72 hours prior to the kickoff of free agency. That way teams could kind of present some scenarios to players they can contemplate before the free agency window officially opens. And when that happened before, you usually would get a flurry of signings within the first hour that it was open, because a lot of teams and players are already talking and have decisions made prior to. You'd often hear of cases where players would even schedule a flight to go visit a team and see their facilities, talk to management, that kind of stuff. So they kind of felt with this year, obviously free agency moved a little bit slower. We also have a flat salary cap, some different environment in the NHL, and the whole market's changed really with everything that's gone on this year. So, if they would have had that open window like they normally would do, they felt maybe things might have progressed a little quicker and a little bit swifter there. But I guess we'll see again if there's any changes, but it is something that is being considered for future change. There's also talk as well that there could be like a regional bubble system for the start of next season. It's really early to tell at this point. It's not going to be your traditional bubbles like we saw in Toronto and Edmonton, more like regional hubs where players would basically be brought in for a few weeks at a time, then they'd be able to go home and see their families. Like, they wouldn't be in a bubble for an entire season. They'd never agreed to something like that. You heard many players talk about after they came out of the bubbles to complete the 1920 season, how difficult it was, especially being away from family for such an extended period of time for those who went further in the playoffs. And well, they're not going to agree to do something like that again, but there is still possibility we could see very regionalized play as early as January. There's even talk there could be a kickoff, maybe the week right after Christmas leading into New Year's with some potential exhibition games. It's still really too early to say for sure, but it's just ideas that are on the discussion table. And it's like I said, they're going to have to wait for a lot of things to kind of fall into place and see how everything's going on with the virus and everything and all the areas and what they can do. But it is another item being discussed for the next return to play. Now, we have a variety of things to talk about when it comes to Pittsburgh and Arizona. They have a variety of news pieces I want to touch on. First up with the Penguins, they made a surprise announcement today that they've fired assistant general manager Jason Karmanos, who has been with the team for about the last 6 years. Prior to that, he worked with the Hurricanes for, I think it was 14 or 15 years. He is the son of Peter Karmanos, of course, the former owner of the Whalers and Carolina Hurricanes. He was involved with ownership there for a long time before finally selling the Hurricanes over to Tom Dundon here not that long ago. Now, of course, in the case of Karmanos, he worked for the Hurricanes in a variety of executive roles, including assistant GM and also the executive director of hockey operations, and he was essentially fired from the team that his father owned, and his father deemed it a family matter. I know there was a situation where he and his siblings were suing their father kind of for losing their inheritance or something. It was a family financial big mess that was going on, and I'm not really sure what came of that. I didn't really follow the story after the team was sold, but ultimately we know that Karmanos was struggling mightily financially, which is why he eventually sold the Hurricanes to Dundon, and there was a lot of talk about them even being relocated before a more stable owner kind of came into play here. But of course he after he was fired from the Hurricanes, went to the Penguins. Of course, Jim Rutherford went from Carolina to Pittsburgh too. So somebody that would have known and worked with him for an really extended period of time. Rutherford became general manager of the Penguins not too long after Karmanos went there. He's been there for the past 6 years, like I said. And Rutherford announced that essentially he's reevaluating their whole executive team and management team, and this is the first move in kind of like a reshuffle to kind of get things changing there. So we'll see if he makes any other additional changes, but it's not real common to see an assistant general manager be fired. Quite often, they either resign for other opportunities or whatnot, and it's just kind of an odd scenario, not something you see very often. In the case of Karmanos here as well, he recently interviewed with the Coyotes for their vacant GM job before they decided to hire Bill Armstrong. So he was involved in that as one of the candidates. So a month ago, he was a candidate for a GM job in the NHL, and now he's fired as an assistant GM. Just kind of an odd scenario that we've kind of seen unfold there. Now, sticking with the Penguins here before we jump over to the other Coyotes news, because there's a couple of different pieces I want to touch on. The Penguins are rumored to possibly not necessarily be done when it comes to making their roster set for next year. They could continue to want to dip into free agency or possibly trade, but free agency seems to be the more likely way we could see them go here. We know that they still would like to ideally add a number 3 center iceman to improve the depth down the middle for the bottom 6. Now, one of the players that's on the market that seems to be interested in going to Pittsburgh and have mutual interest back is Erik Haula. Now, Haula, of course, really made his mark with the Vegas Golden Knights after being taken in the expansion draft, had a 29-goal season, but the past couple of years he's spent battling a lot of injuries, and he followed up that 29-goal season by having a serious injury in Vegas, missed a big chunk of that season, and then after that he was traded to the Hurricanes in a cost-cutting measure by the Golden Knights. And he spent part of the year with Carolina before he was involved in that trade to the Florida Panthers, which brought Vincent Trocheck over to Carolina. So Haula, again, missed a fair bit of time this past year. Played just over 40 games in Carolina, another 10 or 12 games in Florida. So over the last 2 years, he's missed a fair bit of time. And I can't help but wonder now, with everything where it is with free agency, I'm guessing that he doesn't have a lot of negotiating really power here, because obviously a player like him who's battled a lot of injuries, like we saw a player like Josh Levo, just signed with the Flames. I know he hasn't had quite the amount of success that Haula has. He doesn't have a 29-goal season on his resume, but he does have some pretty solid goal totals from the past couple of years. And if you look at last season, they both spent a fair bit of time on the injured reserve, and they also both put up similar point totals as well. So he signed for $875,000. I've seen some people saying Haula could get a 2 or 3 year contract at $2.5 to $3 million per year. And I'm just not sure that's going to be out there. A team like the Penguins would not be able to afford that much. They only have $1.3 million in space right now, but they could take another forward because they have 13 on the roster right now to NHL level and demote one to free up some extra space. They have a number of players making around $700,000 to $750,000, so they can get them up over $2 million. But I honestly think for a guy like Haula, if it were me, I probably wouldn't go more than a 1 year deal at $1 million. Maybe even a little bit less. To my opinion, he's a great player who's still relatively young, could give that third line center spot a good boost if he can play like he did a few years ago. But after 2 years of missing a lot of time and having a lot of injuries, I'm just not sure with the current market the way it is that if he wants to play in the NHL, that he's just not going to have a lot of bargaining power. And if the Penguins might be able to find themselves a steal of a deal here on a 1 year contract. I mean, if you look at what else is out there on the market, there's Derek Brassard, who used to play with the Penguins and who they moved on from, so I don't see there being a fit. They could consider maybe a guy like Carl Soderberg, who also kind of could play a similar role, a little bit less offensive, but still a veteran depth centerman who could fill a gap for a season. That might be an option. Might be able to get him in cheaper too. I don't know. But either way, though, there is rumors of Haula and the Penguins having mutual interest, and there's about 3 to 4 other teams inquiring on Haula's services. So he's one of the key free agents that are left here that definitely going to get signed. It's just a matter of where and for how much. So do you see a fit for Haula with the Penguins as a potential third-line center as a free agent here? Do you think they can get him on a pretty cheap contract given what he's been through for injuries the past couple of years? Now, a variety of notes here on the Coyotes. First up, Martin Hanzal, a longtime Coyote, former first-round pick from way back, has officially announced his retirement. Of course, the 6'6" forward came into the league with a lot of potential, battled a lot of injuries, played, I believe it was 10 years with the Coyotes organization, eventually was a deadline trade to the Minnesota Wild, then signed a pretty good contract with the Dallas Stars, and unfortunately was not able to really play for a big chunk of that, spent a lot of time on injured reserve, and now he has finally officially retired. It's been a little while since he's played, so no huge surprise there. He's had a ton of back issues, but he was a big, strong power forward type of player who, like I said, had a ton of promise, ton of potential. Unfortunately, a lot of it wasn't realized to his fullest potential due to injury, and his time in the NHL is up, even though he's still really not all that old. I think he's still only in his early 30s, but that's one note. Another note when it comes to Coyotes is that longtime Coyote captain and one of the greatest players ever, Shane Doan, is a possibility to return to the organization in some sort of management capacity and in some kind of executive role. Now, he's currently working for the NHL, so it's not quite clear if that's definitely going to happen, but apparently there have been some talks. The Coyotes have apparently reached out and have had some early discussions, and they would be very interested in bringing back one of their all-time greats here to work with the organization if they can find a fit. We know Doan still lives in the area, so from a family perspective, it would certainly work very well. There'd be no issues there. So we will see. I'm sure that a lot of Coyotes fans would probably love to see him return and be involved with the organization in one capacity here or another. The other third piece of news for the Coyotes, unfortunately, isn't really good news. The Coyotes are getting a lot of flack today from a variety of people on social media after news that's kind of come out here about their first draft pick from the 2020 NHL Draft. Now, of course, as we know, the Coyotes didn't have very many picks this year due to the ones that were either traded or that they had to forfeit as a result of being in trouble basically with the NHL for testing junior age players that was not allowed to be done. So the first pick that they made was in the 4th round, which turned out to be Mitchell Miller, and it's come to light now. Apparently, obviously, anybody real close involved with scouting, and a lot of NHL teams, they already knew about this incident we're going to talk about before the draft, but I personally didn't know about it. But I know there were a lot of teams that were aware of this and shied away from this player. Apparently, he was convicted of a form of bullying a black mentally disabled boy growing up that he apparently had harassed or bullied for a long time, number of years. And was convicted and found guilty of doing that. Now, of course, because of that, a lot of NHL teams shied away from him. A lot of NHL teams did talk to him and interview him, and apparently were not pleased from the reports I'm seeing with how he interviewed and how he came off. They didn't really feel that he really learned from his lessons from what had happened, and that they just didn't get a good vibe from him that he was a changed person, or that they could see that he learned from his mistakes. Obviously, a lot of people, myself included, love to see people get second chances, especially when they're that young. A lot of people make mistakes, some of them even really big ones, and some people can be rehabilitated, reformed, and learn and change. And I'm all for seeing anybody get that kind of opportunity, but you have to wonder here that there just doesn't seem to be, a whole lot of regret on his part. Now, apparently he wrote letters to NHL teams outlining what had happened, so they were aware of the situation. He was trying to be upfront with it, but we've never seen a case, at least that I've been able to locate through the news articles, that he's actually apologized to the victim. There was an article shared by Elliot Friedman on Twitter where the victim is even interviewed and outlined, and sounds like he went through an extremely difficult time. It's just a really unfortunate situation, and many NHL teams did not want anything to do with this player, and the Coyotes took him. They would have had to have known about this situation. It was just too big of a story amongst those that are really close for the draft circles. I know for somebody like myself, I really only pay attention to talent that's really, in the first round, maybe second round talent. This is a player who was drafted in the fourth round. Some felt would have had higher, draft possibilities if this incident had not have happened. But I know I've seen others say that if the Coyotes hadn't been the ones to pick him, that they would have been, potentially somebody else would have grabbed him probably in the fifth or sixth round. So before this story came out, we've seen a lot of good things from the Coyotes organization in regards to, this type of thing and creating more opportunities for minorities and making hockey for everyone and, obviously all that kind of stuff. And now here we have this story and just a lot of people are just really just not fond of the idea that the Coyotes drafted him and would like to see him completely dismissed from the organization. But there is certainly, if you turn on social media at all today, you're probably going to see this story when it comes to the Arizona Coyotes, and it's just not a good look for them. And we'll see if this player really ever gets an opportunity or if this situation is ultimately going to come back to haunt him for the rest of his life. Like I said, but it's unfortunate that he doesn't really seem to show a lot of remorse and that, people can change, which is ultimately what we need to see here for there to be any kind of positivity if come from the story at all. The Coyotes did put out a statement indicating that they feel they're in a situation where to give him a second chance and to kind of show leadership and help him grow. And it's just, it's just not what people want to see and hear right now. This player needs to show some remorse and be apologetic to his victim and really show that he's learned, I think, before he gets much more of an opportunity. So we'll see how this story develops and what more comes from it. But right now, he does have a scholarship to the University of North Dakota as well, which came 2 years after this incident first became public. So obviously they could be scrutinized as well for giving this player a hockey scholarship that soon after the incident. I guess we'll have to wait to be seen on this and what develops further. And from what I'm hearing on the NHL rumor mill, it looks like free agent forward Mike Hoffman is still holding out to probably find somewhere around a $6 million deal. We know he is willing to sign a one-year contract. Obviously, we saw Taylor Hall sign around $8 million, and we've got Evgeny Dodonov with one of the other higher valued forward contracts given out. Former teammate here, Hoffman, get $5 million per year from the Senators. So, of course, he must feel that he's somewhere in between, closer to Dadonov, but more so of an offensive weapon. Looking for $6 million, trying to outweigh teams here, see who can kind of outweigh each other and who's going to blink first. I mean, is Hoffman going to come back and lower his asking price and just to get a deal done? Or the team's going to jump up to his asking price to get a deal done? It can go either way. But we know that there are certainly the main teams involved are the Nashville Predators, the Columbus Blue Jackets, to a degree the Boston Bruins. The Bruins are one of the teams that would have to be creative with the salary cap. The Preds and the Jackets are teams that both cleared out some space leading into free agency that we knew they were preparing themselves to do something more substantial. I don't think they were able to do this. I think Hoffman was probably more of a plan B than for these teams than obviously than a plan A. But at this point, there's not a lot of options left. And one of these teams are likely going to end up coughing out $5 to $6 million to sign him. But we'll see who outweighs each other the longest and where he ends up landing for next year. And another free agent out there who might be kicking himself and regretting not accepting an offer here would be Andreas Athanasiou. Now, of course, we know he was a restricted free agent forward with the Edmonton Oilers after they gave up a couple of second-round picks to acquire him from Detroit at last year's NHL trade deadline. But at this point, Athanasiou, even though he wasn't qualified as an RFA, I do see reports from Kurt Levins of the Edmonton Journal indicating that the Oilers did turn around and offer him a 2-year contract, though, once he officially became a UFA at lower money. So essentially, it's not that they didn't want to keep him. They just didn't want to keep him at his qualifying offer, which was they felt was too much money. So they let him go become UFA and then immediately made him an offer once that window opened on a 2-year contract around $2 million per year, which is less. I believe his qualifying offer was closer to $3 million. So, they get to save some money. They get to keep the player. And he rejected that offer. So apparently it was a combination of either the money or where he saw the team putting him. Obviously, they would have talked likely about what they saw for a role for him and where a fit for him on this team. What they, maybe he just didn't feel it was going to work out. I don't know. But at this point, considering how long he's gone and being unsigned, I think it's pretty doubtful that he gets a $2 million contract or even possibly even a 2-year contract just about anywhere. So I think he's going to probably end up accepting a 1-year deal for far less money would be my opinion on where I think things are heading here. So Athanasiou is a player who has potential. He's got a lot of speed, great skater. A former guy who can put up close to 30 goals, but can he recreate that and do it again? A lot of people right now I think are losing confidence in what he's able to do here. So it'll be interesting to see where he lands and if he does indeed regret passing up an opportunity to stay with the Oilers. So that is all your news and rumors here for today. There will likely be another video coming out a little bit later talking about some latest signing of contracts that we saw on the RFA and UFA side of things, so stay tuned for that. That'll be coming out a little bit later as well. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.